really warm welcome to everybody. And I think we will probably start this morning's The Offer. So a very warm welcome to you all. I'm Heather Ackroyd. I'm part of the Anchor Circle for Culture Declares Emergency. And please put your name and organisation into the chat, so if you wish, so that everybody can see who is here and keep up contact. And I'll just explain a little bit about Culture Declares. So Culture Declares is a growing global community of arts and culture champions declaring a climate and ecological emergency. The crisis compels us to imagine new possibilities and to propose systemic change. Our vision is that the UK cultural sector declares and takes action on the climate and ecological emergency. Our mission is to grow and support a diverse community of cultural sector declarers. And our values are to tell the truth, take action, and seek justice in the face of the emergency. Culture Declares Emergency offers an online toolkit to inspire and support pledges, declaration announcements and follow-up actions, designed kite marks, banner, leaflets and sash designs, community networking on social media, and in events for declarers to share, grow and learn. Since its launch in April 2019, over 1,000 individuals and organisations have declared an emergency through Culture Declares. If you haven't yet declared, please do and get in touch if you have any questions. We're part of a growing network of cultural declaring movements, now including music, architecture, heritage, and tourism. Culture Declares works in solidarity with declaring movements globally to raise collective visibility and increase the urgency of our shared message. The offer is a response to the context of coronavirus and the devastating impact it has had on our society, and not least on the creative and cultural community. It is a space for anyone involved in or interested in a cultural response to the climate and ecological emergency to gather, to question, to share, and to support each other. It has been happening every Wednesday through to the end of this month. And in June, I think we're offering 2, possibly 3. We will be sending out a newsletter to let you know what the program is. As of July, August, September, the offer will be happening bi-weekly, and it will concentrate on the morning event, which will be discursive and creative in the sense of workshops and interactive. And that will be 11 o'clock in the morning. If anyone is interested in making an offer and leading a session, please do get in touch at culturedeclares@gmail.com or via our social media. We are recording this session, so if anyone would rather not appear in that, you can turn your computer or phone cameras off, but still get the audio. Please also make sure you are muted. Thank you. And now I'd like to hand over to Polly Gifford, Executive Director of Complicité Theatre, who will be leading our offer this morning, representation and misrepresentation. Thank you, Polly.
So we've lined up 3 speakers for today, and we'll hear from them shortly, all of whom have different perspectives on the theme of representation and misrepresentation of Indigenous cultures. We wanted to present both the macro and the micro, sort of the global and the personal. We have Sarah Shenker from Survival International, who leads on their Uncontacted Tribes campaign, and therefore in some ways who speaks on behalf of people who choose not to speak to us directly. We have Thiago Jesus from People's Palace Projects, who are based at Queen Mary University of London, and who run, among many amazing projects, cultural exchange programs with Indigenous artists. And we will hopefully also have Jeremy Dennis, who is a contemporary fine art photographer and who is a tribal member of the Shinnecock Indian Nation in Southampton, New York, and whose work explores Indigenous culture and identity. Now, Jeremy is yet to join the call, so we very much hope that it's ridiculously early in the morning in New York, so hopefully he'll be joining us soon. But before we hear from them, just wanted to give you a little bit of context as to why we wanted to propose and host this session. It was inspired by Complicité's production, The Encounter, that was created and performed by our artistic director, Simon McBurney. It was first produced in 2015, and it was inspired by the book Amazon Beaming by Petru Popescu. And it tells the story of a National Geographic photographer, Lauren McIntyre, who in 1969 traveled to the Amazon to search for an uncontacted tribe to get himself a cover shot. And it was the Mayaruna who he was searching for. And he found himself lost in more ways than one. And he had an encounter that was to challenge everything he knew about the limits of human consciousness, about time. And in the show, Simon traces McIntyre's journey, interwoven with scenes from his own life and from people who contributed to the making of the show. And the show has traveled the world, and it's won many awards, particularly for its binaural sound design. So you watch the show with headphones to really place you in the heart of the story. We've been rebroadcasting it for the last week or 10 days, and I hope many of you have had a chance to see it. So we're often asked, and Simon is often asked, why we feel able or indeed justified to tell the story of the Mayaruna. Most recently, this was a question that came up in an A-level student Q&A just last week. And I think in terms of the encounter, the answer is that it isn't a story of the Mayaruna. It's the story of a white Western colonial man who is going to take something that he desires. And it's a story of where that leads him. And any commentary that is made is about Lauren McIntyre and about his culture, i.e. our culture. But of course, within that, we are also representing the Indigenous people that McIntyre encounters in the story. And that required a lot of research, a lot of time, and a lot of thought. Simon made 2 journeys into the Amazon with the huge support of People's Palace projects. And visiting the Mayaruna, he was asked a very simple question, which was, why are you here? And after explaining, he was given a message to take back. And if you've seen the show, you'll know that that message from the Mayaruna was, tell people that we exist. And when I first saw the show, this gave me a very real sense that there was a thread connecting the stories and the people involved in making the show together, without which I think it might have felt less powerful. And when we decided to put the show online again, within the lockdown period, it was very important to us to contextualize it in the present day. For us as a company to acknowledge that we are here now and that the world is a very different place because of COVID-19. And it was equally important to offer that space to our friends and partners in the Amazon to be able to introduce themselves in the present in their own voice. And so we commissioned 2 short films from a filmmaker called Takama Kuikuru, with whom Simon and the company have had a long relationship. And we put these out alongside the Encounter broadcast. And I'd just like to share a couple of minutes of one of them now, and I think then at the end I will show you some of the other one.
Olá, eu sou Takuma, eu sou cineasta, eu sou do povo Kuikuro. Moramos nessa casa, junto com minha família. Moro aqui nessa aldeia. Eu sou do povo Kuikuro, da aldeia Ipatse. Tem 9 povos do Alto Xingu que pratica essa cultura, que pratica ritual que a gente tem aqui. Mas totalizando, tem 16 povos indígenas do Xingu, aqui na terra indígena do Xingu. Então, aquela ali, casa, é nossa casa, a minha casa. Nós moramos desse jeito, nossa casa desse jeito. Nossa família mora nessa casa. Todos nós moramos. Tudo feito pela madeira, tudo nativo. não é plantado. Nós tiramos no mato longe e trazemos aqui. Toda essa madeira tem seu espírito, toda a casa tem seu espírito. Tudo feito, só feito assim, tudo ele representa tudo a vida da natureza. É assim nossa casa, aqui na aldeia. Porque aqui nossa vida é isso. Nossa conexão aqui com a natureza. Se não tivesse aquele espírito de natureza, mato, pássaros, a gente não estaria aqui. E aqui, nossa aldeia, onde a gente mora, a gente está ligado com a natureza. A gente conecta com nosso origem, que a gente fala, né? Que nossa história começa, não é só pela pessoa. Nossa história começa pela natureza. Por isso que tem que ser, vocês conhecer essa peça, vocês conhecer, muito importante conhecer essa história.
Okay, I'm actually going to stop there, but I wanted Takema's voice to be present in the conversation. You can see the rest of that film on our YouTube channel. Takema also took part in a live Q&A that we held on Zoom. Again, as it was essential that he speak directly alongside Simon and the other guests both about the story and the play, but also about what's happening today. So at the heart of this, I think for us, are the ongoing personal relationships that have grown and developed alongside the production and that have come to be hugely important in their own right, and with whom we can share the platforms that we have access to as they have shared their understanding with Simon and the company. Another long-term partner on our encounter journey is Survival International. And next, I would like to hand over to Sarah Shenker from Survival to talk a bit about their work. So Sarah.
Thanks, Polly. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, great. Hello, my name's Sarah. I'm a campaigner at Survival International, which is the global movement for tribal peoples. And we work with tribal and Indigenous peoples around the world, helping them protect their lives, defend their lands, and determine their own futures. And of course, representation or misrepresentation is a really important element in that fight. And actually, it's the difference between Indigenous people's survival on the one hand and their annihilation on the other. So it's a question of life and death. A really, really important question. And let me see now if I can share my screen to show some examples of that. Can you see the picture correctly of 4 men? Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so these are Indigenous men from the Tenetehara Guajajara tribe in the northeastern Brazilian Amazon. And they are Amazon guardians who patrol their forests to look for illegal loggers and kick them out. And they're doing that to defend this forest for their families who depend on the forest for their survival. For, you know, they hunt, they fish, they gather fruits and berries, but also very importantly for the survival of their uncontacted neighbors who are Indigenous people of another tribe, the Awa tribe, who have no contact with mainstream society and who are the most threatened people on earth, the most threatened tribe on earth. And this is a photo I took of some of the guardians one day, one normal day after lunch near a stream near their community. And we use this photo in our campaign for the protection of this land, which in turn is part of a wider campaign which is pushing governments and companies around the world to protect all land where uncontacted tribes live, given that they're the most vulnerable peoples on the planet. And Here's another photo of an Amazon Guardian, Olímpio, the Guardian's coordinator. And in this photo, he's got genipapo paint, forest paint on his face, as we can see, and he's carrying his Borduna club. And he painted himself one morning and he said, "Sarah, please take a photo of me. I want the world to see that this is how I sometimes look." And for Indigenous people, of course, painting themselves with their paints from their forest, or using sometimes their feather headdresses or armbands, as we can see in the case of Olímpio, is an important normal part of their daily routine, but also important for them to show the world who they are, and it's part of their resistance, part of their fight for their survival. So we also use this photo in our campaign. Then let's look at this photo. Again, Olímpio in the front, other Guardians in the back. Quite a different photo. This photo was taken by a journalist and appeared prominently in a major US newspaper some years ago, with a headline which described the Guardians as a militia. So surprise, surprise, we don't use this photo in our campaign because this photo is extremely damaging to the Guardians. In fact, the Guardians had explicitly said to the journalists and to many other journalists and photographers, please don't portray us as a militia, because A, we're not a militia, and B, this sort of representation is extremely dangerous for us because the Guardians have a lot of enemies, the logging mafia, for example, local corrupt politicians who want to criminalize them and send them to jail for having not done anything wrong. So this sort of photo completely plays in and is therefore extremely dangerous. And another sort of dangerous representation of Indigenous peoples is a completely fake representation of Indigenous peoples. And this is a photo by the photographer Jimmy Nelson of some Waorani women, and apparently they have fig leaves to protect their modesty. But we know very well that this is not what the Waorani look like. The Waorani, most Waorani wear clothes, and to our knowledge, and we've spoken to them as well, they don't wear fig leaves in this way. So it's a completely fake thing that has clearly been contrived, and they're posing for the photo. And this is part of Jimmy Nelson's book, Before They Pass Away, whose messaging reflects this sort of fake, fantasized image of Indigenous peoples. The very title of the book, I won't go into too much detail, but the very title, Before They Pass Away, is problematic because Indigenous peoples aren't passing away, you know, bad luck. They're actually being killed by gunmen, by the theft of their land, and by genocidal policies, by politicians, including the Bolsonaro government in Brazil at the moment. And the other problem, I suppose, is that this idea, before they pass away, it's implying some inevitability that these people cannot survive in our day and age and in our contemporary world, when actually Indigenous people are contemporary societies, just like any other society. We're all living in the here and now, we're just living in different ways, of course. Another type of dangerous representation of Indigenous people is that of brutal savages. And this is something that we've seen not just in photos, but I mean, one key example of that is the anthropologist Napoleon Chagnon, who famously described the Yanomami people of southern Venezuela and northern Brazil as the fierce people. And he depicted them as people who are constantly at war, constantly killing each other. This sort of description and misrepresentation of Indigenous peoples, again, plays into the hands of their enemies, is used by people, including governments, who want to undermine their rights and prevent the protection of their land. And I mean, it's also plays into the hands of evangelical missionaries who want to go and make contact with these people to integrate them and bring them into Western society, which, as we know, can wipe out whole tribes because they have no resistance to outside disease, and because invasions often follow these forced contacts. And in the photo that we're seeing here, this is a journalist, an Australian TV presenter, Paul Raffaelli, from Channel 7. And actually, I've got a quote here. I just want to quote him and his team and what they said about these indigenous people, the Suruwaha of the central Amazon. So they said, the journalist said that these Suruwaha people, and I quote, encourage the murder of disabled children in the most gruesome way possible. They take poor little innocent babes into the jungle to be eaten alive by wild beasts. And then he goes on to call these people a suicide cult from the Stone Age and the worst human rights violators in the world. And in this photo, they've depicted it as if the Suruwaha woman doesn't want to shake his hand, and instead she wants to kill him, is how they present it in the program. But actually the Suruwaha then said no, it was because they were a bit afraid because he was wearing so much sun cream, they thought he might have a skin disease, so they didn't want to shake his hand. Survival complained to the Australian Media Authority, who then ruled that actually this program broke the racism clause of the national regulations. So that was obviously very good. That was part of our Freak Show TV campaign, which is trying to stamp out all racist misrepresentations of Indigenous people on TV. We've also got our Stamp It Out campaign, which is doing the same thing, but in other parts of the media. And this is a key part of the fight to make the world a better place for Indigenous peoples, because if you don't recognize them as contemporary societies, then you're not gonna fully grant them the rights that they deserve, as all contemporary societies deserve, and ensure that those rights are upheld. And so all of these images are very important, and these photos I've shown, they're not just one-off cases of unfortunate slips. They are part of a very dangerous colonial phenomenon, which is used to deny Indigenous peoples their rights, which are clearly set out in national and international laws. And this sort of image is therefore feeding the genocide of Indigenous peoples, and we must put a stop to them. And before I finish, I just couldn't finish before showing you two photos of uncontacted tribes. And of course, that it's a very different question about representation and misrepresentation of uncontacted tribes. The question being, the first question being, should they be represented at all? And our answer at Survival is yes, they should. We should use photos of uncontacted tribes because these are crucial to the campaign for their survival. If people don't know that they're there, then how can we pressurize governments and companies to allow them to live in peace on their land with no invasions? And governments have policies, and Survival also has our own policy about what sort of photo is acceptable or not of uncontacted tribes. Obviously, it's very sensitive. Obviously, you cannot approach an uncontacted tribe to take a photo because that could kill them. So there's several details there, but the wide point is that certain images of uncontacted tribes taken from the air, from a distance, are crucial in the campaign for their survival. And this is an uncontacted Sentinelese man pointing his bow and arrow up towards a passing plane, showing clearly, I mean, I think this is one of the best examples of the expression, a photo can speak 1,000 words. He's showing clearly he doesn't want contact. He wants outsiders to stay away. The same here, these indigenous, uncontacted indigenous people in Acre state in Brazil on the border with Peru show that they don't want contact with outsiders, and that right must be respected. And indigenous peoples across Brazil, across the world really, and their allies, including Survival International and others, are fighting for that right to be respected. And as I said, it's a matter of life and death, and representation is absolutely key here. So I think I'll end on that note. Thanks, Polly.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Next, I'd like to introduce Thiago Jesus from People's Palace Projects, who will tell us a bit about the work that they do. So over to you, Thiago.
Oh, hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? Yeah, so let me just share a screen here. Share. Oops. view slideshow. So, can you all see that? Yeah. Oops. So, first of all, thank you very much, Paulie and Heather, for inviting me to be part of such important conversation. My name is Thiago Jesus. I am a project manager at People's Policy Projects, and we are an Arts for Social Change research center based at Queen Mary University in Maryland. And we create international exchange projects, mainly between UK and Brazil, to understand how artistic exchange can improve the practices of community-based artists and organizations. We have research projects in various areas, from mental health to homelessness, to youth engagement, and also Indigenous development. We, change the slide. So we started working with Indigenous peoples in 2014, when Complicité invited us to organize 2 R&D visits to the Amazon for the production of the encounter. And that's how we met that guy on the left that you saw in the video in the beginning that Paulie sent as well, Takuma Kwikuru. So Takuma is an Indigenous filmmaker from the Kwikuru people that does this beautiful work of documenting the culture of his community to preserve it, because he's aware that his culture is disappearing every day. So as you saw in the video, Takuma lives in the Ipatse village of the Kwikuru people, which is in the indigenous territory of the Xingu. There are around 800 Kwikuru people living in 3 or 4 different villages in the territory, and they are surviving through their language, their rituals, their connection to the forest. The Xingu indigenous territory, it's in the south basin of the Amazon region. It was created in 1961, 1 year after their first encounter with the white men, and it's a very big territory. It's the size of Belgium, and there are 16, as Takuma said, there are 16 indigenous peoples living there, and the total number is 7,000 people in the territory. And if you look at satellite images of the Xingu, you will see that it's actually becoming an island of nature surrounded by deforestation. And this image that I chose to put on the slideshow with him, it's an image of a documentary he did called The Hyper Women. And this film is about an old woman who is dying. She's really old, and she's the only person in the community that knows how to sing all of the songs of an old women's ritual. So the community decides to perform that ritual again for her, so she could sing for the last time, and that her knowledge can be documented by Takuma before it disappears forever. Oops. I'm struggling. I have 2 screens here. That's why I have chosen these 3 images because I think they are very interesting provocations, I think, to our conversation today. And just echoing what Sarah said, I think these images bring very much that Indigenous people, they are our contemporaries. The Kwikuru, for example, they are a very technological community. Although they live isolated in the forest, they live in this ongoing exchange with non-Indigenous society. So they live this very traditional life, they live off the land, they fish, they have their rituals, their ancestral rituals, they speak their own language. And the biggest part of their lives is the same as it was 100, 1,000 years ago. At the same time, they have the latest iPhone 11, they learn to speak Portuguese, they play football every day at 6 p.m., they listen to hip hop, and they love Nike and Adidas. They have built roads connecting their village to the nearby cities. The closest one is 200 kilometers away, to give you an idea of the distance. So they go to the city to work, to shop, to study, to get tattoos, as you can see. And so I think it's important to say that these people, they make their own choices on what they want. You know, they're constantly negotiating their transition, and they also refuse things. So, for example, in the village, church is not allowed, cigarettes not allowed, alcohol is not allowed, and their energy is powered by a generator. And the chief does not allow the generator to be turned on for more than 2 or 3 hours a day, because he knows that when the generator is on, the internet is on, people go on social media, and then that affects very much the daily life of the community. So they are, in their own terms, preserving their identity And I think the work that Takuma does as an artist, as a filmmaker, is really important in this process of representation. So these is just some images of the work that we have done with them. The premise of our work with PPP, with the Kwikuru, is to create opportunities for the Kwikuru to dialogue on equal terms with artists and cultural organizations from around the world, so that the Kwikuru can be protagonists in the documentation and the representation of their own culture. At the same time that they create awareness to their causes and they generate income so the community can stay living in the village. Over the 6 years of partnership, we have done various different projects together, but as we have a limited time, I'll just try to give you a panorama. As I said in the beginning, it started with the exchange with Simon McBurney and Complicité. So when Simon did this exchange visit to the Amazon, we invited Takuma to do a similar exchange in the UK. So Takuma came to the UK to spend 6 weeks for a 6-week residency in 2015. And in a similar way that Simon went to the Amazon to tell us in the UK a story about the Amazon, Takuma decided to do this documentary film called London as a Village, which was about his own encounter with London. So the documentary is in his own language, and it was made for his community. So he was like having an anthropologist from the Xingu looking at us here. And during this time in London, Takuma asked us whether we could create a residency program for international artists in the village, so they could collaborate with him in documenting the Kwikuru culture and using different art forms and technologies, and that every member of the community would have the opportunity to engage and participate on this process of exchange. So the Kwikuru, they built a traditional house for that, with the photo you can see on the right-hand side on top. That became a cultural center in the village. And since that house was ready, we organized 3 visits, exchange visits, all of them of no more than 2 weeks. And we engaged 30 artists in total, coming from various countries in the world, in UK, in Spain, and Brazilian artists as well. And among these artists, there were set designers, experts in photogrammetry, sound designers, writers, virtual reality developers, and all of them putting their expertise at the service of the Kwikuru in kind. And these are some images of some of results of our collaboration so far. It has been a journey, really, because each project leads us to a new investigation, into new insights, into new opportunities for documentation and preservation. And these works have been shown in the UK, in London, at the Tate Modern, in Madrid, in New York. And if all goes well with the COVID, we are going to be at the next Venice Architecture Biennale next year as well. But just going back to the question of representation, I just want to speak a little bit more about the collaboration that we did in 2018 with the Horniman Museum in South London, because we piloted an installation that combined traditional artifacts and objects of the Kwikuru with the digital data that was captured during the residencies. So by that, I mean augmented reality, the 3D scanning of the village, binaural sounds that were recorded. So we wanted to explore new approaches for representing indigenous cultures in museums and galleries. We had the Kwikuru selecting the artifacts that they wanted to display, and each object in the exhibition was animated by a hologram that was recorded or captured in the community of one Kwikuru person telling their own story, their own involvement, and why they selected that object, why that object was important for them. So it wasn't a curator saying this is used for that by this community. We try to create that level of engagement, a direct engagement, respecting the fragility of the Kwikuru community, so the audience could understand the stories and the meanings that they wanted to tell. And you could clearly see how contemporary and the issues of representation as well, when they decided to put next to their most valuable necklace, the shell necklace, they decided to put their football team t-shirt. And so Sorry. So yeah, with one thing, this image on the bottom as well, you could see that all the visitors were guided through the exhibition by a Kwikuro artist who was also participating in the evaluation. You can see him sitting there with people and talking about their experiences. Just to wrap it up now, with all of this collaboration so far, we have tried to create new possibilities for Takuma to preserve his culture using new technologies, digital technologies, respecting the fragility of their environment and of the culture. We have tried to propose new ways of framing stories of indigenous peoples, how they are told and by whom they are told. We wanted to, we hope we created opportunities as well to equip the community with new skills and resources for them to archive their own processes, generating international exposure, an import income for the community, and also an international network of creative people supporting the Kwikuro, which is invaluable. So I'm gonna stop here. I'm gonna leave my, oops, how do I change to my next slide? It's not changing. But anyway, I'll leave my email address at the end. So please feel free to contact me if you're interested in knowing more. I'm very happy to talk and share more materials with you all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Thiago. I'll just stop your screen share. Great. I think we do have, we have Jeremy with us. Jeremy, welcome.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Thank you so much for getting up so ridiculously early to join our conversation today. It's over to you if you're ready. You should be able to screen share. I've made you a host.
Let's see. Here we are.
Fantastic.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Jeremy Dennis. I'm an artist working primarily with digital photography. I first want to thank Heather and Polly for inviting me to present my research from a project I'm working on titled On This Site, Indigenous Long Island. To briefly describe what my project On This Site is, On This Site is an art-based research project that I started in 2016, which aims to preserve and create awareness of culturally significant Native American landscapes on Long Island, New York. To do this work, I document archives such as historical societies and libraries, visit local tribal governments for interviews, try to pinpoint the sites of important historical and sacred sites, and present what I find using photography sort of as a caption. This is actually my home and community, the Shinnecock Indian Reservation in Southampton, New York. And the building that we're looking at is our community center. Back in 2010, we joined over 570 plus other federally recognized tribes in the United States, which generally means that each 570 tribal nations have their unique history, language, family lineage, connection to place, and ability to self-govern. One thing about us is that we're 800 square acres, but I like to look at ourselves as sort of a country within a country. This is our tribal seal. There's so much symbolism that you can see. For example, yellow being east. If you're familiar with the Native American color wheel, east means the rising sun or the dawn. We used to be whalers, so you can see two right whales, as they were called. The turtle in the middle representing the 13 tribes of Long Island, and Shinnecock Indian Nation being in what we call wampum. Wampum is a clamshell with purple and white hues, and we would use drills to create this beadwork that you're seeing in the middle. In terms of representation for this project, there's just so much work to be done. In America, there's such a strong belief that Native Americans no longer exist. From the past 200 years, I have found the use of the word remnant to describe indigenous people, or for example, as you can see, the last of the Shinnecock in many newspaper articles and obituaries. what's at stake of being misrepresented in this way? Well, research has shown that the lack of accurate representations and lack of visibility directly undermines public support for Native American rights. As I mentioned before, the Shinnecock people have been around for more than 10,000 years. We survived colonization for 400 years, and yet only 10 years ago, we have been federally recognized as a sovereign nation. Before us even, the Mashpee Wampanoag back in 2007 in Rhode Island received their federal recognition, and today, despite the global pandemic, are battling for their homelands. This isn't the first attempt at taking away title or land from Indigenous nations. The termination era in the United States from the 1940s and 60s was sort of a way for the government to say, okay, we're going to treat Native Americans equally, but we're also going to dismantle everything that makes them self-governing and take away their land. From my experience and observations, one of the reasons why Indigenous people are so misunderstood is because Indigenous history and studies are looked at so far into the past that they can feel irrelevant. However, a recent National Congress of American Indians study found that 87% of state history standards includes no mention of Native American history after 1900. In my approach to help resolve some of these issues of irrelevance and misrepresentations, I designed my project on this site to look at our history from a site-specific landscape approach rather than, say, a timeline. To complete this work, back in 2016, right out of Penn State, my grad school, I received $10,000 from a nonprofit called Running Strong to pursue this project, which allowed me to travel, produce exhibits, photo books with a history related. And what we're looking at is just a screen grab of the website. The URL is on the bottom right. That's free to access and for the public benefit, essentially. This is one of the very first sites I knew and included in the project, which is a 3,000-year-old sacred burial site in the Shinnecock Hills, about 5 minutes away from the reservation. Right where that white house is located on the top right is where the ancestral burial grounds were once located, but in the 1990s, it was completely destroyed and desecrated for housing residents. Ironically, that same year, essentially, the Repatriation Act has passed in the United States, which basically made more protections for Native American burial sites. Here's a artist rendering of what might have happened on that exact location. We used to have group burials. This was a time called the Orient period, about 3,000 years ago. And because where I live in the Hamptons, as they call it, real estate is the #1 industry. And so what are these sacred, unique, and hard to find hilltops become just real estate ventures. The project itself on this site doesn't just have 3,000-year-old landscapes. This, for example, is the Unkechaug Community Center in Mastic, New York. And for me, this was so important to include sites that are contemporary because growing up on the reservation, which is only 800 square acres, you kind of feel like that's the edge of where you belong. And yet what I'm finding out through my research is that if you look at the landscape rather than what you're looking at in social studies or history classes, you start to realize that our ancestors are essentially everywhere, that you can find their footsteps and evidence of inhabitation. This is the Hawthorne site, again in the Shinnecock Hills, but only recently excavated in August 2018. Again, this is another case of a house being developed in a place that they really shouldn't be developing. The Shinnecock Hills, in our perspective, is our ancient burial grounds, and yet routinely they're often overlooked from the town's perspective and offered up as a place to build housing. I was actually on site at the Hawthorne development landscape, and one of the contractors actually found a bottle similar to what you're seeing on screen. This one actually has a inscription called Wobeton that has the owner's inscription in it, but the one on site was green. It had glass as thick as a centimeter thick, and I immediately recognized it from the research I had done previously. And so this project is helping not only shed light on overlooked history, but also preserving sacred sites today. When I started out with my project, I thought there might be 8 in total. And what we're looking at is the Wikipedia I'm starting to build up on the project website online. This is a Wikipedia for something called a shell midden. And shell middens are kind of like the ancient ruins that we imagine in archaeological films. These are the sites where if you find something like this, these shell middens, just piles of shells, these are often referred to as refuge heaps, but actually they hold so much cultural importance because sometimes carved objects, art pieces, even food can be preserved in the massive shells. This is a raw map, sort of what I work with to pinpoint and try to photograph these sites. If you can see my cursor, the Shinnecock Reservation is right here on the right edge of Eastern Long Island, and everything in red is sort of the to-do list put in visual format. And so what I'm trying to do is find more grants because if you're familiar with New York City and Brooklyn and the 5 boroughs, it's so expensive to get there. So eventually my plan is to move west and help illuminate some of the indigenous history of that area. I do just want to end on thanking everyone again for taking a few minutes to learn about Shinnecock and leave it as an open conversation in terms of collaboration for future questions and so on. Thank you.
Brilliant, Jeremy, thank you so much. We will post the contact details of all 3 speakers in the chat. We're going to have an opportunity in a moment to talk about some of what you've heard and also how some of these issues manifest within your own life and your own work. But I just wanted to have a moment for any key questions from the speakers, and actually just wanted to ask one, and it almost seems too obvious a question, but why is it that it's important for artists to be involved in these issues, both directly, Jeremy, through your work, Thiago, through the many artists that you've worked with? Yeah, why is it so important? Why do you focus on having artist voices in this discussion? I don't know, Jeremy, if you want to.
Oh, sure. I'll speak very briefly. If you're familiar with the reputation of the Hamptons, it's very a wealthy place, a tourist location. And the Shinnecock Indian Nation, for example, is very low income. For example, our median income is about $10,000 from the last census. And so what I'm trying to do as an artist is try to bridge these kind of troubled waters between our community and our surrounding community. There's just so much at stake. Like I said, letting the public just understand us as a vanished race. Sometimes people think of us as being either too white or too black or not stereotypical enough to be considered indigenous. And so as an artist, you're in control of what the public sees to a large extent. Even though you're just one individual, I could take a photo, I could take an interview, I can just dispel everything in people's minds if they take the time to look at my work. And that's what I am motivated by.
Thank you. Thiago, do you
Yeah.
have
No, I think I would just say that I think that art, I think art creates new possibilities, create new opportunities and possibilities of imaginations, I think. And I think the artistic language allows us and people to feel, to collaborate, to understand, and it also has a different set from our very Western way of thinking, you know, dividing what anthropology, what geography, what, you know, our systems of knowledge are very divided, while from my experience with the Kwikuru, the way that they feel the world, they live in the world, the way that they exist is very much connected. And I think the language of the arts allows us to experiment that in a different way.
Sarah, I don't know if you had any reflections on that. Obviously you work less directly, but artists I know have been involved in your campaigns and have often been very vocal advocates for the work of survival.
Yeah, I mean, I just echo that good representations, useful representations, correct representations of Indigenous peoples through art is fundamental to public opinion, which in turn is fundamental to making real and lasting change in terms of protecting Indigenous people's lands and making sure that their rights are upheld. And on that note, actually, I had a quick question for Jeremy. Is that okay?
Yes, please do.
Okay, because Jeremy, hello, Jeremy. You highlighted the link between the representation of Indigenous people and public opinion and support, or not, for Indigenous peoples. And I just wondered how you're seeing that play out at the moment in terms of the rise of social media over the last 10 years or so. I wonder if you've noticed any change or what you think the current situation is.
Well, one of the very even historic moments nationally in the United States was the Dakota Access Pipeline. That's entirely a grass movement, because most of the people who traveled to North Dakota from their homelands didn't have any income, didn't have any kind of assets or money. They probably spent most of their money getting there in the first place. And so just using social media, using photography, using interviews is so important when you really have nothing else. Just showing up, paying attention, sharing stories can be the difference between a pipeline going in and a pipeline being taken out. So there's a lot more at stake, but that's one of the great examples of what can be accomplished.
And we just wanted to invite you to respond to some of what you've heard, and specifically to discuss how issues of representation manifest within your own work and within your own lives. It would be really fascinating just to hear a little bit about what some of the conversations were covering. Would anyone like just to share a little bit about what they spoke about? Do unmute yourself if you're, I can't actually see everybody.
Can I repeat what I tell you?
Yes, sure. Sorry, Mina, yes. Actually, Mina, your signal has frozen a bit.
Do you want me to make? Oh, okay.
Okay, now we can hear you.
Yeah.
No, we've lost.
Yeah, thank you very much for all this sharing and platform of arts. I'm a filmmaker in Paris, and I was just making this suggestion that I'm very concerned of what is happening in Brazil these days. And I make a film about the indigenous people who are living in very isolated places. And I follow a lot what the wonderful thing that survival is doing. And I was thinking maybe to get our energies of filming, photography, all the platform of art that we are making, to put it together and create a platform to bring it to the public opinion and launch a call that the people call and participate in constructing the world of after Corona for the indigenous people. And I think to put all kind of art together, like the photography, painting, exhibition, filming. And I myself, I will offer the film that I have just finished about the relation of the shamanism with the indigenous people of Hubda that are near Manaus with nature. And I think that will bring a lot for us to think about the world of tomorrow. So I just launched this this appel, and I bring my energy to follow cultural decades and survival to see if we can open a platform and that we can all offer our work for tomorrow.
Thanks, Mina. Do you want to put a contact in the chat, and then if people are interested, they know how to contact you? You know, if you go to the bottom of your screen and click on where it says chat, you'll be able to write your email. Does anyone else want to share any reflections that they had in their small groups? Okay, I can see a hand from Charlotte and then from Chris. So Charlotte first.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, so I threw out a question which I'd love to throw out to everybody, actually, which popped up last week. You know, when we were in the Zoom call after the encounter, the discussion, which was when Takuma talked about having a double consciousness. So his tribe have to have a double consciousness, one that is rooted in his own culture in the Amazon, and then one that understands the modern Western way of totally trashing the planet. No, I don't mean that. Okay, so civilization. And my thought was, well, surely we too, in order to really get back to having a proper relationship with the planet, with the mythology that underpins all our stories, is to actually develop that kind of indigenous consciousness ourselves, to go to really rediscover and re-remember that kind of consciousness, because unless we do, we will not understand our fellow human beings who live in a very different way, and we won't be able to find our way back to a planet and recover those kinds of relationships and restore a home for ourselves and all the other non-human beings here. So that was my provocation, which we discussed.
Thank you. Thank you. Chris, did you want to?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I agree with that, Charlotte. I was in a group just with Jeremy and with Mary, and Mary wasn't able to communicate with us very easily, so she used the chat a bit, so some of her comments are there. I think that one of the things that Jeremy referred to in his talk earlier, and which I relate to, is this idea that art is an alternative channel of communication. Not, in fact, that makes it sound very neat and singular, but it's a massive extra variety of channels of communication. You could say each channel unique to each artist if you want to, but it's more coherent than that. It allows us all, whichever art forms we're involved in, film, poetry, other forms of writing, whether it's an individual art form or a collaborative art form, theatre, film, so on, music. There's a tremendous variety and diversity of alternative communication platforms that we have and channels that we have. We don't have to consult with the structures of society which are oppressive. We don't have to consult with them for permission. We don't need the permission of media owners. We can go and ask for that permission if we want to, or if we're silly enough to, but we don't have to. So theatre is theatre and all of the arts together are this potential channel of a range of channels of communication. So given if that's the case, if that's broadly true, then you know, what I'm interested in particularly is looking for and trying to develop and encourage a more global sense, and drawing out that kind of global sense, that global humanity. And it's always been my sense that there is not a very rigid, but certainly you can put your finger on all kinds of people all around the world over many generations who've said and done and expressed the same kinds of values, same kinds of principles. They've seen the same kinds of injustices and they've recognized them from all sorts of different cultural viewpoints. So when we look at an indigenous group, from wherever in the world you think about, we have a potential there to meet people and to meet cultures and ideas which are not filtered through the structures of Western society. So one, art is important in that kind of way. It's massively important. And in the context of a global humanity and a planet which has been given by the United Nations 10 years to sort itself out, to seriously sort itself out. The United Nations has told us we need to transform our societies and our economies in the next 10 years. And there's no way we can do that without also transforming our political systems. So we have a lot to do. And I think for me, in my position as the curator and founder of Redline Artworks, this global arts project, it's the only place I want to be. It's the only place I feel I should be. I've been involved in campaigning and so on for over 50 years now in all kinds of ways. And I feel it's more important now than it's ever been. Indeed, I feel it is absolutely urgent. I wouldn't want to be in any other area of the arts or any other area of life other than the area I'm in which I think a lot of Culture Declares Emergency members recognise. I think a lot of you, not maybe everybody to the same degree, but a lot of you recognise we're in a big fix. And the truth and honesty coming through these testimonies from Indigenous people are a strong reminder of how unconnected we all are with our planet.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Culture Declares Emergency is great for, providing the platform for us to say things like this.
Thank you. And actually, Mina, do take down Chris's organisation name because he may well be the platform that you're looking for.
Yes, I am.
So take down Redline Artworks and find him online.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
With an idea, or with an eye on the time, I just wanted to see if our three speakers had any last thoughts they wanted to share before giving the last word actually to Takuma Kwekuru. So I don't know, Jeremy or Sarah or Thiago, if you had any last thoughts you wanted to share with us. Shall I go to Sarah, you first? I'll put you on the spot.
Okay, yeah, sure. Now, I completely agree with what Chris has just said about the importance of campaigning and activism. Of course I would, because I'm a campaigner. But it's very refreshing to be here and to be speaking with you all and listening to you, because I suppose it's always been the way, but I feel like there's a massive urgency now, more than ever, for us all to use materials that we have or that we create or that Indigenous peoples themselves are creating. For example, Takuma, or we've got a project called Tribal Voice, which you can see online, where there are lots of different videos, 1 or 2 minutes each, quite raw, not hugely edited or anything, straight from Indigenous people saying whatever they want to the world. And I think it's important that all of us use that sort of material or photos or films, and I'm interested also in seeing Mina's film about the Gupta whenever that's possible, in order to support the fight for Indigenous people's rights. And so obviously I just invite everybody also to join the campaign for uncontacted tribes' rights and the campaign to stop Brazil's genocide. And I suppose the last thing I wanted to say was to thank everybody, and to thank you, Polly, and thank Culture Declares and Complicité and Palace Peoples as well for organising this. It's been great.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you, and thank you very much. Thiago, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would just, because I'm conscious of time, but I just want to say that thank you very much for the opportunity. I think Takuma will mention in the last video, we'll talk about a message from how the situation is right now in the Amazon. But I just wanted to say that I think it's important that we as artists and practitioners, we find ways of bringing those messages beyond our museums, our galleries, our plays, and to, I think it's very much what Chris said. I think we have the opportunity, we have the channels, we have the means to actually bring that message beyond our cultural spaces. So let's get into schools, let's get into, let's get that voice everywhere. I think that's the most important thing, because the time is running out and we won't move forward. There won't be a planet without Indigenous communities. So we really need to coexist together. We really need to learn from them. We need to give them platform, protagonism in what they're saying. So I think that's the only way that we're gonna actually move forward. So that's it for me.
Thanks, Thiago. Jeremy, any last thoughts?
I just want to thank everyone for coming today, listening, sharing, and communicating. I appreciate it and keep up the work.
Thank you. I should just say that Jeremy, through his website, which has been posted in the chat, has some beautiful books for sale, and which all go to support the projects that he's been talking about. So do go and look at Jeremy's website, which is jeremynative.com. Thank you all for joining us today. In a moment, I'm going to play the second short film that Takuma Kwikuru made for us. It's slightly unusual in that it does end on an appeal which the Kwikuru and which People's Palace projects have launched to help them resist COVID-19 and this particular situation they find themselves in the Amazon. But before that, I just want to say that we have an evening offer this evening with the wonderful pianist Sarah Nichols. And at 7:30, you can hear some of Sarah's music and some of the work she's been developing. And she's really keen to discuss artistic responses to the climate emergency. So do sign up for that. We then take a week off the offer because on the 10th of June, we are going to be presenting the new strategy for Culture Declares and how we'd like collectively to take the movement forward. So I very much hope that you will join us for that and join us in the next stage of this fantastic gathering of people. It's always really inspiring to be part of these events. So thank you again. These do now go up on our YouTube site. So if you have colleagues or friends who you think would be interested, then do point them towards the Culture Declares YouTube. And I'm now just going to share screen again. And give the last word to Takuma. Thank you.
Então, como está hoje a gente aqui? Durante pandemia. Que pandemia? A gente não estou entendendo nada aqui. As crianças não estão entendendo nada aqui. A gente vendo isso através de redes sociais, a gente vendo através de televisão, trazendo medo para a gente, porque nossa população é muito pouco. Já morreram muita gente. Se a gente morrer, não temos mais a pessoa que pode contar a história depois, como aconteceu também durante sarampo, quando teve primeiro contato. Muita gente morreram, muita gente recuperaram também, e para contar a história. Essa coronavírus que está chegando, parece que não é brincadeira. Imagina a gente aqui que não tem dinheiro, aonde nós vamos socorrer o paciente, como é que nós vamos socorrer, como é que nós vamos tratar. Se uma pessoa, uma família de uma pessoa pegar esse vírus, ele vai transmitir para uma casa, todo mundo está contaminado. É isso. Por isso que estamos com medo, importante contar isso, importante a gente tem que ficar aqui dentro da aldeia, isolado mesmo. Nossa situação é difícil, muito difícil. Por isso que é importante alguém ter que contribuir para a gente. Lançamos também campanha de arrecadação de alguma coisa, de como nós podemos ficar aqui. Precisamos do apoio de cada um de vocês através daquele campanhas. Lançamos. Imagina esse nosso novo governo, Bolsonaro, está atacando o povo indígena desde que campanha que ele tinha feito. Ele quer acabar com o povo indígenas. Até enquanto o coronavírus está tendo, até ele queria matar todo mundo indígenas. Não quer ajudar. Ele é inimigo dos povos indígenas. Mas a gente não pode ficar parado aqui como braço cruzado, só escutando a fala dos políticos falando sobre a gente. Mas a gente tem que responder. Mas é isso. Mas vamos ficar firme, trabalhando, enquanto a gente está aqui forte. Valeu, tá?
Thank you again, everybody, and we hope to see you again very soon.